Hey guys, Serac here, and today I've got my 3x Freezing Chain structure deck profile. So I will be posting a improved list in a few days' time once the cards I've ordered arrived for it. But this one today is just using cards from the structure deck. So we have 3 copies of Speaker of the Ice Barrier, Speaker for the Ice Barrier even. While you control another Ice Barrier monster, defense position monsters your opponent controls cannot change their battle positions. Then, if you control an Ice Barrier monster, you can special summon this card from your hand, and if this card is in the graveyard, if you control an Ice Barrier monster, you can banish it and make an Ice Barrier token, which is just a level 1 token. This is a really, really good card. It's free extension, and from both the hand and the graveyard, you can use both effects in a turn, which makes making cards like Trishula really, really easy. And so it's just a really, really good card to have in the deck. We then have 3 copies of Revealer of the Ice Barrier. Now, this allows us to discard a card and special summon a tuner from our deck. So we'll usually be special summoning one of the next cards I'll show you. But it locks you into water monsters. The entire deck is water, so that doesn't really matter for us. And then if it's in the graveyard, and you would discard or send a card from your hand to activate an Ice Barrier monster's effect, you can banish it instead. And this works on itself as well. So once you've discarded once for it, you can then banish it to use another copy in a future turn if you need to. Again, very, very strong card in the deck. We then have 3 copies of Zuijin of the Ice Barrier. Now we're using 3 copies of this because we're running the generals in this build because we don't have access to lots of the other powerful water cards that exist. So you contribute this card, special summon 1 level 5 or higher Ice Barrier monster from your hand, which is all your generals. If this card is in your graveyard, except the turn it was sent there, you can target 1 level 3 or higher water monster, reduce its level by 2, and special summon it. So this allows you to modulate levels of all your Ice Barrier monsters. It's extension, it's extra material for making cards like Trishula, and allows you to lower the levels of your synchros so you can get them to add to the correct level. We then have 3 copies of Hexa, Spirit of the Ice Barrier. This is a really nice level 1 tuner. And again, it has the ability to modulate its own level. So you can use it to send Zuijin, or you can use it to send the 1 level 3 tuner we're running, just as a name to send with Hexa. So, on to the generals. We've got 3 copies of General Wayne of the Ice Barrier. If your opponent controls a monster and you control an Ice Barrier monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. Spells and traps sent from the field to your opponent's graveyard are banished instead, which is very, very useful in this sort of virtual world or Drytron heavy format. And if this card is normal or special summoned, which is a really nice clause to have, you can search 1 Ice Barrier spell and trap. And the couple of Ice Barrier spells that we are running are very, very strong and very, very useful to have. So we have 1 General Grunard of the Ice Barrier. This gives us an extra normal summon. We'll generally be special summoning this using a card like Zuijin. And so we're only running 1 of these generals because they clog the hand much more. This deck is very normal summon reliant, so it's really nice to have an inbuilt searchable double summon. We have 1 General Gantala of the Ice Barrier, which allows us to special summon Ice Barrier monsters from our graveyard. But it's during the end phase of the turn, but it can target our synchro monsters. Then finally, we have 1 Medium of the Ice Barrier, which is a nice floodgate that we can bring out. And we can bring it out with Zuijin, or we can bring it out with its own effect, but it's one of the best floodgates that we have in our monster lineup. And then finally, for the final Ice Barrier monster in the deck, we're just running 1 copy of Defender of the Ice Barrier as a level 3 tuner target for our Hexa, so we can change its level to 3. For extenders, we have 3 copies of Silent Angler, which if we control a water monster, we can special summon this card from our hand, but we cannot special summon monsters from our hand for the rest of the turn. But it's rest of the turn, so we can do all our special summoning from our hand and then plot this onto the field. And then our final monster is 1 copy of Fishball Launcher as another tuner that can also bring itself back. So then we have 3 copies of Medallion of the Ice Barrier. This is one of the best searching cards in the game. It's just a shame it's in the Ice Barrier archetype. It searches any monster in the archetype. No level restriction, no attack restriction, no once per turn. And we can search it off General Wayne of the Ice Barrier. We then have 3 copies of Freezing Chains of the Ice Barrier. This is an archetypal monster reborn. We can obviously bounce it and reuse it with Duloran, because it's continuous. And while we control 3 or more Ice Barrier monsters, they're unaffected by any effects of monsters summoned from our opponent's extra deck. We have 2 copies of Salvage for recursion. Now onto the traps. We have 3 copies of Crackdown. We're a synchro deck. We like stealing our opponent's monsters and using them instead of our own. So that's a very useful card to have. We have 2 copies of Terror of Trishula as non-targeting, non-destructing removal. The only thing to note with this is it's not an Ice Barrier card, so we cannot search it with cards like General Wayne. We have 2 copies of Fiendish Chain as an interruption. And finally, we have 2 copies of Heavy Storm Duster as back row removal for us. So that's the main deck. Now, the extra deck is very, very simple. There are 5 Ice Barrier Synchros. You buy 3 decks, and then you take out 2 of normal Trishula because it's at 1. So we only got 13 cards in this extra deck, but that's only because we're just using cards that come in the structure deck, and the original Trishula is still at 1. So we have 3 copies of Trishula, Zero Dragon of the Ice Barrier. When this card is summoned, banish 3 cards on the field that your opponent controls. Very, very strong on-summon effect. Non-targeting, non-destruction, 3 cards. And then when it's destroyed, you can special summon a Trishula from the graveyard or extra deck, make its attack 3300, then half the attack, and negate the effect of all monsters your opponent controls. That second effect won't happen very often unless you trigger it. But it has to be destroyed by an opponent's card, so you'd have to, say, crash it into your opponent's 3k monster for it to trigger. But just the banish 3 part of the effect is incredibly strong, and so we're running it. We have 1 Trishula, Dragon of the Ice Barrier. Because it's at 1, it's still incredibly, incredibly strong. It's a level 9 synchro, and you can banish up to 3 cards your opponent controls, 1 from their hand, field, and graveyard. And it is up to, so you can banish 0 or you can banish 3, depending on how many cards your opponent has. Unlike Necros of Trishula, where if your opponent has an empty hand, you don't get to banish any cards at all. We then have 3 copies of Gungnir, Dragon of the Ice Barrier. This is very nice, simple destruction effect. You can discard up to 2 cards, then target the same number of cards your opponent controls, destroy them. Very nice with cards like Revealer of the Ice Barrier that allow you to just banish it instead, so you're not continually trading out cards from your hand. We have 3 Duloran, Tiger King of the Ice Barrier. This was the perpetrator of many a loop back when it was originally released and had no hard once per turn, but now it's not. Its main use will be bouncing cards like your Fiendish Chains, your Crackdowns, your Freezing Chains of the Ice Barriers to use their effects again. and also for pushing that extra little bit of damage through. And finally, we have 3 copies of Brionac, Dragon of the Ice Barrier. Again, perpetrator of many a loop before it had a hard once per turn on it, and the ability to bounce so many cards on the field, just as many cards you have in hand, essentially. But it's still a very, very strong form of removal in the deck. So, that is the 3 Freezing Chain structure deck profile. As I said, when the cards I've ordered for my improved version arrive, I will get that up as well. So, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and so on, and I will see you all again soon.